Porque las mujeres emocionalmente inteligentes suelen sentir celos. Emotional intelligence is often praised, but rarely understood. For many women, it becomes a quiet burden. They read between the lines. They sense what is unspoken. They notice shifts in tone, energy, and intention, long before others are aware anything has changed. This sensitivity is not weakness. Jung would describe it as a refined relationship with the unconscious, but this refinement comes at a cost. Emotionally intelligent women often feel alone, even when surrounded by people, not because they lack connection, but because depth is rarely reciprocated. They listen carefully. They hold space. They regulate emotional climates. Over time, they become containers for what others cannot face in themselves. Jung warned that when one person consistently carries the emotional weight of a group, the psyche compensates with isolation. Loneliness emerges not from absence of others, but from absence of mutual recognition. The woman may feel, "I am seen for what I give, but not for who I am." This distinction is crucial. Being needed is not the same as being known. Emotionally intelligent women are often chosen as confidants, mediators, healers, but they are rarely met at their own depth. Others come to unload, not to encounter. This creates an invisible imbalance. The woman becomes emotionally fluent in other people's inner worlds, while her own remains largely unexplored by others. Jung called this asymmetry dangerous, because what is not mirrored begins to feel unreal. The woman may question herself. Am I too intense? Too perceptive? Too much? These doubts are not personal flaws. They are symptoms of relational mismatch. Depth requires resonance. Without resonance, intelligence turns inward. Loneliness grows quietly, not as despair, but as a subtle withdrawal. The woman becomes selective. She speaks less about what truly matters, not because she has nothing to say, but because she has learned how rarely it is received. This withdrawal is often misinterpreted. Others may see her as distant, aloof, or independent. They do not see the inner negotiation, the constant calculation. Is it safe to reveal this? Will it be understood or diluted? Jung believed that the psyche retreats when it is repeatedly misunderstood. Retreat is a form of self-protection, but prolonged retreat creates isolation. The woman begins to live in two worlds, an outer world of functionality and competence, an inner world of richness and complexity. The gap between them widens. This gap is where loneliness lives, not because she lacks relationships, but because she lacks shared depth. Emotionally intelligent women often long for conversations that do not require translation, for silence that does not feel empty, for presence that does not demand performance. They do not seek constant intimacy. They seek authentic resonance. Jung emphasized that true connection is not frequent. It is precise. One resonant relationship can dissolve years of loneliness. But until such resonance appears, the woman may feel fundamentally unseen. This invisibility can lead to exhaustion. She may continue giving emotionally, hoping reciprocity will emerge. But emotional intelligence cannot force depth in others. It can only recognize its absence. At a certain point, the psyche intervenes. Fatigue sets in. Not physical fatigue, but emotional saturation. The woman may feel detached from roles she once performed effortlessly. Caretaker, listener, emotional anchor. This detachment is not failure. It is evolution. Jung believed that loneliness often precedes a major stage of individuation, because individuation requires separation from collective expectations. The woman must withdraw to hear her own inner voice clearly. Loneliness becomes a threshold, painful, but meaningful. It strips away superficial bonds and reveals what truly nourishes. The woman begins to ask different questions. Who meets me, not just uses me? Where do I feel expanded, not drained? Who can sit with complexity without rushing to fix it? These questions refine her relational landscape. She may have fewer connections, but they become more real. Jung never believed that the goal was to be universally understood. He believed the goal was to be internally aligned. From alignment, connection follows naturally, but not in crowds. In precise encounters, the emotionally intelligent woman learns to tolerate solitude without pathologizing it. She understands that loneliness is not a verdict. It is information. Information that her psyche is ready for deeper resonance, and that depth cannot be negotiated, only recognized. As loneliness becomes conscious, it begins to transform, not immediately into connection, but into discernment. The emotionally intelligent woman starts to recognize that not all loneliness is the same. There is the loneliness of abandonment, and there is the loneliness of differentiation. Jung made this distinction clear. Abandonment wounds the ego. Differentiation strengthens the self. Many women confuse the two, because both feel quiet, both feel separate, both feel heavy, but they arise from different movements. Abandonment comes from being left. Differentiation comes from stepping away. The emotionally intelligent woman often experiences both, sometimes simultaneously. Early in life, her sensitivity may have gone unmet. She learned to read others, because others did not read her. This created competence, but also an early sense of being alone. Inside relationships, Jung would say, this is where the shadow begins to form. Not a dark shadow, but a hidden one. Parts of her emotional life were set aside to maintain harmony. Needs, anger, depth that made others uncomfortable. Over time, these parts gathered energy. Unlived energy does not disappear. It waits. Loneliness is often the signal that unlived parts are pressing for recognition. The woman may feel restless. Even in stable relationships, she may feel misunderstood without being mistreated. This confusion is painful because there is no clear external cause. Jung believed that when suffering lacks a clear cause, its origin is often internal and symbolic. The psyche is not asking for correction. It is asking for integration. The woman begins to sense that her loneliness is not about finding more people. It is about becoming more herself. This realization shifts her orientation. She stops asking, "Why doesn't anyone see me?" and begins asking, "Where am I still unseen by myself?" This question is confronting because it removes the familiar narrative of external lack, but it returns power. She notices where she edits herself, where she simplifies her language, where she dulls her insight, where she withholds curiosity, not to manipulate, but to belong. Belonging has always been the currency. Jung noted that the fear of exile is one of the deepest human anxieties. For women, this fear is amplified. Historically, exclusion meant vulnerability, so adaptation became survival. But survival strategies outlive their necessity. The emotionally intelligent woman now stands at a developmental threshold. Continue adapting and remain lonely inside connection, or risk authenticity and tolerate temporary solitude. This is not an easy choice. Authenticity does not guarantee connection. It guarantees truth. Truth can be lonely at first because it dissolves illusions, but it also attracts resonance. The woman may notice that as she becomes more direct, some people withdraw. They were attached to her emotional labor, not her presence. This loss hurts, even when expected. Jung emphasized that grief is the cost of psychological truth. Every gain of consciousness comes with loss of innocence. The woman grieves the fantasy of being fully met by those who could not go that deep. She grieves time spent overgiving. She grieves the younger self, who believed love meant endurance. This grief is not regressive. It is integrative. It allows compassion, without repetition. As grief moves, resentment dissolves. Resentment keeps us bound to what we outgrow. Loneliness softens. It becomes less sharp, less personal. The woman starts to experience solitude rather than loneliness. Solitude is chosen. Loneliness feels imposed. This shift is subtle, but transformative. In solitude, she hears herself clearly. Her thoughts slow down. Her emotions become more nuanced. She notices complexity without needing immediate expression. Jung believed that solitude is the laboratory of the psyche. Without solitude, the unconscious cannot speak. The emotionally intelligent woman often avoided solitude before, because solitude amplified awareness. Now, awareness is no longer feared. It is trusted. She begins to enjoy depth, without audience. Reading, writing, thinking. This inner richness stabilizes her. She no longer feels empty when alone. This changes how she relates. She no longer seeks connection to fill absence. She seeks connection to share presence. This distinction is everything. Connections formed from absence are often anxious. Connections formed from presence are grounded. The woman becomes more selective, not guarded. Selective. She notices who can tolerate silence, who does not rush to fix, who can stay with ambiguity. These people are rare, but they exist. Jung believed that true psychological encounters are infrequent, but decisive. One encounter can recalibrate an entire inner world. The emotionally intelligent woman stops trying to be understood by many. She waits to be met by a few. This waiting is not passive. It is intentional. She does not chase resonance. She recognizes it. When resonance appears, it feels effortless. Conversation flows without performance. Depth emerges without force. She feels seen, without explanation. This recognition dissolves loneliness quickly. But even before such encounters, something important has already changed. The woman no longer uses people to regulate her inner world. She regulates herself. This self-regulation is not emotional suppression. It is emotional containment. Containment allows feeling without overflow. Jung stressed that containment is essential for maturity. Without it, emotional intelligence becomes emotional leakage. The woman now contains herself. This containment makes her safer to herself. She can feel sadness without collapsing. She can feel longing without desperation. She can feel joy without fear of loss. This emotional steadiness creates inner companionship. She is no longer alone with herself. This is the deepest shift. Loneliness often begins as estrangement from self. When the woman returns to herself, outer loneliness loses its grip. It may still appear, but it no longer defines her. She understands that not being mirrored does not mean she is invisible. It means she is specific. Specificity reduces numbers, but increases truth. Jung believed that individuation always leads away from the collective norm. This departure creates loneliness, but it also creates meaning. Meaning sustains. The emotionally intelligent woman chooses meaning over crowd, depth over noise, presence over performance. Her life may look quieter, but it feels fuller. She no longer fears being alone. She fears betraying herself, and that fear keeps her aligned. From alignment, connection eventually follows. Not everywhere, but where it matters. And when it does, loneliness ends. Not because she found others, but because she stopped abandoning herself. As self-abandonment dissolves, another truth begins to surface. Loneliness was never the enemy. Avoidance was. The emotionally intelligent woman begins to see how often she once stayed emotionally available, to avoid confronting her own unmet depths. Giving was easier than asking. Listening was safer than revealing. Understanding others protected her from being misunderstood. Jung would say that this pattern is not altruism alone. It is a strategy, a way to remain connected without risking exposure. Exposure is dangerous when one's inner world has rarely been received. So the woman learned to be indispensable, useful, reliable, emotionally competent. But competence does not guarantee intimacy. Often, it replaces it. People come to her for clarity, for grounding, for reassurance. They rarely come to know her. This asymmetry becomes exhausting. And exhaustion is the psyche's last warning. Not a failure of strength, but a signal of imbalance. The woman begins to feel a quiet resistance. She hesitates before responding. She feels irritation where she once felt obligation. This irritation is not cruelty. It is honesty emerging. Jung believed that irritation often signals a violated boundary. The psyche protests before the ego understands why. Instead of suppressing it, the woman now listens. She notices where her yes no longer feels true. She experiments with pause, not explanation, not justification. Pause. This pause creates space. And in space, the true emotional economy reveals itself. Who remains when she no longer overfunctions? Who withdraws when she stops carrying the emotional field? These observations are painful, but they are clarifying. Clarity reduces confusion. Confusion drains energy. As clarity increases, the woman's loneliness shifts again. It becomes cleaner, less charged. She is no longer lonely inside relationships. She is either connected or alone, not both. This distinction is liberating. Jung emphasized that psychological suffering intensifies when opposites are mixed. Connection mixed with self-erasure. Solitude mixed with shame. When opposites are separated, tension resolves. The woman learns to be alone without judging herself. She learns to be connected without disappearing. This balance is not static. It requires continual awareness. But awareness is now natural, not forced. The woman notices her inner responses without immediately acting on them. This creates internal trust. She trusts herself to recognize when something feels off. This trust reduces anxiety. Anxiety often arises when the psyche does not trust the ego to listen. Now, listening happens. The emotionally intelligent woman stops explaining her depth. She allows others to meet it, or not. This non-pursuit is not withdrawal. It is self-respect. She no longer interprets misunderstanding as rejection. She sees it as incompatibility. This reframing is powerful. Rejection attacks identity. Incompatibility protects it. Jung believed that identity stabilizes when the ego accepts limitation. Not everyone can go everywhere with you. Not everyone can follow you inward. This acceptance ends a certain kind of loneliness. The loneliness of expecting universality. Instead, the woman embraces specificity. She becomes deeply herself, rather than broadly accessible. This reduces her social field, but deepens it. She may have fewer conversations, but they matter. Fewer connections, but they nourish. She stops participating in emotional exchanges that feel hollow. Small talk loses appeal. Not from arrogance, but from attunement. Her time feels valuable now, not because it is scarce, but because it is inhabited. Jung wrote that time becomes meaningful when lived symbolically. The woman's solitude becomes symbolic. It is no longer empty time. It is incubation, reflection, integration. During this solitude, she notices her own inner dialogue. She becomes kinder to herself. The harsh inner critic softens, not because it disappears, but because it is understood. The critic once tried to protect her from exclusion. Now, exclusion is no longer feared. So the critic relaxes. Inner conflict decreases. Peace increases. Not excitement. Peace. This peace feels unfamiliar at first, because peace does not demand attention. But over time, it becomes grounding. From this grounded state, the woman's intuition sharpens. She senses who is safe. Not morally safe. Psychologically safe. Safe to be real with. This discernment is not judgment. It is self-care. Jung viewed intuition as the psyche's guidance system. When intuition is trusted, loneliness decreases, because the woman no longer enters spaces that require her to fragment. She chooses environments that allow wholeness. Wholeness is rare, but once tasted, it becomes essential. The emotionally intelligent woman no longer negotiates her depth. She honors it. She may still feel moments of loneliness, but they no longer threaten her identity. Loneliness becomes a passing state, not a permanent condition. She understands that depth often walks alone for stretches, but those stretches are transitional. They are bridges between versions of self. Jung believed that every major inner transition requires a period of solitude, not as punishment, as preparation. The woman trusts this now. She no longer rushes to fill space. She allows emergence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, life responds again. New conversations appear. New mirrors emerge. Not because she searched harder, but because she became clearer. Clarity attracts resonance. Always. And resonance ends loneliness. In the only way that lasts. By meeting the woman where she already is. As resonance becomes familiar, the woman notices a new sensitivity emerging. Not toward others, but toward herself. She becomes aware of the subtle ways she once tolerated misalignment. Small dismissals. Half-presence. Conversations that felt slightly off, but were easy to endure. Before, she overlooked these moments to maintain flow. Now, they register, not as irritation, but as information. Jung believed that as consciousness expands, tolerance for incongruence decreases. This is not rigidity. It is refinement. The psyche no longer numbs itself to remain included. The woman senses when energy drops, when curiosity fades, when she begins to perform rather than participate. These cues are gentle, but clear. She honors them, not with confrontation, but with adjustment. She leaves earlier. She speaks less. She redirects attention inward. This self-attunement reduces inner friction. Friction once kept her awake. Now, stillness does. And stillness reveals deeper layers. In this quiet, the woman begins to notice grief. She had postponed. Not dramatic grief, but subtle sorrow. The sorrow of being ahead emotionally, without companionship. The sorrow of having learned early what others are only beginning to face. Jung wrote that premature consciousness often brings loneliness. To see too soon is to walk alone for a time. This grief is not self-pity. It is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement allows release. The woman allows herself to feel the sadness of being different, without romanticizing it. Difference is not superiority. It is position. A position that comes with responsibility. Responsibility to remain kind, without becoming small. To remain open, without overexposing. This balance is delicate, but she practices it. Practice replaces perfection. She also begins to recognize how loneliness shaped her strengths. Empathy, perception, emotional literacy. These did not arise accidentally. They were adaptations. Now, they are resources. Jung believed that every wound contains its own medicine, but only if the wound is integrated not glorified. The woman no longer defines herself by her loneliness. She sees it as one chapter, not the story. This recontextualization frees identity. Identity becomes fluid again. She allows herself to change, to soften where she was guarded, to guard where she was open. This flexibility is psychological health. Rigidity arises from fear. Flexibility arises from trust. Trust in self. Trust that she can navigate complexity without losing coherence. As trust deepens, the woman's expectations shift. She no longer expects others to meet her depth immediately, nor does she hide it. She allows gradual revelation. Depth is not a performance. It is a process. Those who can follow will. Those who cannot will self-select out. This reduces rejection, not because fewer people leave, but because fewer people are invited too far, too fast. Jung stressed the importance of pacing. The psyche opens when it feels safe. The woman creates safety by honoring her own rhythm. She notices that some people grow into depth over time. Others resist it. She does not force either. Forcing creates resentment. Allowance creates truth. This allowance changes her relationship to hope. Hope is no longer attached to specific outcomes. It becomes orientation, an openness to emergence. She trusts that life is responsive, not always generous, but responsive. Responsiveness is enough. It means she is in dialogue, not exile. The emotionally intelligent woman no longer fears being alone at night with her thoughts. Those thoughts are now companions. They are curious, not cruel. This inner companionship is a profound shift. Loneliness loses its edge when the inner world becomes friendly. Jung believed that the goal of individuation is not independence from others, but intimacy with oneself. From this intimacy, outer intimacy becomes possible, but not mandatory. The woman's worth is no longer measured by relational density. She does not count connections. She feels quality. Quality satisfies. Quantity distracts. This does not make her antisocial. It makes her selective. Selective is not avoidant. It is conscious. Her social energy stabilizes. She no longer oscillates between overexposure and withdrawal. She chooses presence deliberately. This choice reduces fatigue. Fatigue was once her baseline. Now, it is a signal. Signals are listened to. The woman becomes skilled at exiting situations without drama. She does not justify. She does not over-explain. She trusts her internal knowing. This trust is visible. Others sense it. Some feel inspired. Some feel unsettled. She does not manage reactions. She stays aligned. Alignment creates authority, not dominance. Authority, an inner authority, that does not seek validation. Jung described this authority as the voice of the self. When the ego aligns with it, life feels meaningful, even in solitude. Especially in solitude. Solitude becomes a place of return, not escape. She returns to herself regularly. This return stabilizes her. So when connection appears, it is met from fullness, not from hunger. Hunger distorts perception. Fullness clarifies. The emotionally intelligent woman now recognizes loneliness as a teacher she has outgrown. Not something to eliminate, but something to honor and release. She carries its lessons forward. Depth, discernment, self-loyalty. These remain. Loneliness does not. And in this quiet evolution, without announcement, a new chapter begins. Not louder, not busier, but truer. And truth, once embodied, never leaves her alone again. As truth settles into the body, the woman notices something unexpected. She no longer feels the need to explain her inner world. not because it has become simple, but because it has become stable. Explanation was once a bridge, a way to invite others closer. Now, presence replaces explanation. Those who can sense depth recognize it without words. Those who cannot were never going to understand it through language anyway. Jung believed that when inner alignment is reached, symbols speak louder than narratives. The woman's posture changes. Her pacing slows. Her attention becomes precise. She is no longer scanning the room for emotional cues to manage. She is inhabiting her own experience. This inhabitation alters relational dynamics. People interact with her differently. Some feel calmer in her presence. Others feel exposed, not because she judges, but because authenticity reflects. Reflection can be confronting. She does not soften herself to ease discomfort, nor does she sharpen herself to provoke. She remains. Remaining is powerful. The emotionally intelligent woman once believed that connection required effort. Now she sees that forced connection is not connection at all. True connection arises where effort is unnecessary, where silence is shared, not filled, where complexity is allowed, not simplified. This understanding reduces disappointment. Disappointment often arises from mismatched expectations. She now expects alignment, not availability. Availability is common. Alignment is rare. Rare does not mean unattainable. It means selective. The woman's inner world continues to expand. Not outwardly dramatic, but inwardly rich. She begins to notice subtle joys, moments of resonance with herself, a thought that feels true, a feeling that moves freely through the body. These moments anchor her. They remind her that fulfillment is not postponed. It is lived incrementally. Jung emphasized that meaning accumulates through lived moments, not through future resolution. The woman stops postponing life until connection arrives. She lives now. This does not close her heart. It opens it differently. She is receptive without being porous. Boundaries are no longer walls. They are membranes. They allow exchange without collapse. This nuanced boundary is the result of integration, not rules. Integration is lived wisdom. The woman's loneliness, once sharp, has softened into spaciousness. She occupies her own life fully. This occupation is felt. Others respond to it unconsciously. Opportunities arise organically, not always relational. Sometimes creative, sometimes vocational, sometimes simply experiential. Life responds to coherence. Jung believed that the psyche and the outer world are in constant dialogue. When the inner world stabilizes, the dialogue becomes intelligible. The woman listens. She responds thoughtfully. She no longer rushes to interpret signs. She allows patterns to reveal themselves. This patience was once impossible. Now it is natural. Natural because urgency has dissolved. Urgency was fueled by lack. Lack has been integrated, not filled. Integrated. Integration is more stable than fulfillment. Fulfillment can fade. Integration remains. The woman feels rooted, not fixed. Rootedness allows movement without disorientation. She can enter new environments without losing herself. She can leave familiar ones without fear. This mobility is psychological freedom. Freedom not from others, but from inner compulsion. Compulsion once drove her to overconnect. Now, choice guides her. Choice grounded in self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is no longer intellectual. It is embodied. She senses herself. She trusts these sensations. Trust replaces analysis, not ignorance. Embodiment. The emotionally intelligent woman is no longer lonely because she is no longer split. She is whole. Wholeness does not demand company, but it welcomes it. From wholeness, connection becomes a meeting of worlds. Not a merging to survive, a meeting to share. And this sharing, when it occurs, feels unmistakable. No anxiety, no performance, no fear of loss, just presence. And presence, once established, becomes the ground from which everything else unfolds. As presence becomes the ground rather than the goal, the woman begins to notice how little effort life now requires. To feel coherent. Not easy, but coherent. Coherence replaces intensity. She no longer seeks emotional peaks. To feel alive. Aliveness has become steady. This steadiness feels unfamiliar at first. Intensity once masked disconnection. Now connection no longer needs amplification. Jung understood that many people confuse intensity with depth. Intensity overwhelms. Depth contains. The emotionally intelligent woman has crossed from one to the other. She feels less dramatic, but more real. Less reactive, but more responsive. Her emotional range has not narrowed. It has clarified. She can feel deeply, without losing orientation. This changes how she experiences loneliness again. Loneliness no longer arrives as pain. It arrives as space. And space is no longer threatening. Space allows reflection. Space allows choice. Space allows emergence. The woman begins to value space more than constant interaction. Not because she avoids people, but because she no longer avoids herself. Jung emphasized that the psyche needs rhythm, engagement, withdrawal, expression, rest. When rhythm is honored, symptoms fade. Loneliness was once a symptom. Now rhythm is restored. The woman notices that her emotional intelligence has shifted from external attunement to internal coherence. She still reads others well, but she no longer prioritizes their states over her own. This recalibration is subtle, but revolutionary. She does not rush to soothe discomfort, hers or others. She allows feelings to exist without immediate resolution. This tolerance for ambiguity deepens her presence. People feel it. Some feel relieved. Others feel uneasy. She does not interpret these reactions personally. Jung taught that individuation often destabilizes collective expectations. The individuated woman does not fit neatly into projections. She is not easily categorized. This can create distance, but it also creates respect. Respect replaces dependence. Dependence once created proximity. Respect creates real connection. The woman now prefers respect. She prefers relationships where autonomy is preserved, where closeness does not require collapse. This preference narrows her relational field, but it stabilizes it. Stability was once boring to her nervous system. Now it is nourishing. She has retrained her internal rhythms. Chaos no longer feels like home. Calm no longer feels empty. This recalibration is one of the deepest forms of healing. Jung believed that healing occurs when the psyche no longer needs symptoms to communicate. Loneliness was communication. Now communication is direct. The woman knows when she wants connection. She knows when she wants solitude. She does not confuse the two. Before, she sought connection to escape herself. Now she seeks it to share herself. Sharing is lighter than escaping. Escaping was exhausting. She feels her energy returning, not in bursts, but in availability. She has energy for what matters. What does not matter falls away naturally. No resentment, no explanation, just clarity. Clarity is quiet, and quiet is now familiar. The woman trusts quiet. She no longer fills silence with thought. She lets silence speak. In silence, she senses alignment. When something is misaligned, she feels it early. This early sensing prevents accumulation. Accumulation once led to overwhelm. Overwhelm once led to withdrawal. The cycle has ended. She has interrupted it consciously. This conscious interruption is psychological freedom. Freedom not from relationships, but from unconscious repetition. Repetition is what made loneliness feel endless. Now loneliness, when it appears, is temporary, informational. It tells her to return inward, not to reach outward impulsively. She listens. Listening keeps her oriented. Orientation prevents despair. Jung believed despair arises when the psyche loses orientation. The woman is oriented now, not toward outcomes, but toward coherence. Coherence holds, even when life shifts, even when connections change. She trusts that resonance will reappear when appropriate. She does not chase it. She does not fear its absence. She has learned that resonance cannot be forced and cannot be lost. Once internalized, this is the deepest resolution of loneliness. Not replacing it with people, but replacing it with presence. Presence is portable. It does not depend on circumstance. The woman carries it with her, and wherever she goes, she is no longer missing herself. And where the self is present, loneliness has no place to settle. As the woman remains rooted in presence, she begins to notice a quiet confidence forming. Not the kind that announces itself, not the kind that seeks reassurance. A confidence that comes from having stayed with herself long enough to know she will not disappear. This confidence changes how she experiences the world. She no longer enters spaces hoping to be received. She enters them grounded. Reception becomes secondary. Jung would say that this marks a shift from ego orientation to self-orientation. The ego seeks approval. The self seeks congruence. Congruence creates calm. The woman's nervous system reflects this. She recovers faster from disappointment. She is less shaken by misunderstanding. She no longer spirals into self-questioning. When connection does not form, she understands now that lack of resonance is not a personal failure. It is information. This understanding saves energy. Energy once spent on rumination returns to awareness. Awareness is spacious. In this spaciousness, the woman becomes more observant. She notices patterns without judgment. Who leans in when depth appears? Who retreats? Who mirrors curiosity? Who deflects it? She no longer chases patterns to change them. She simply registers. Registration without attachment is a sign of maturity. Jung believed maturity is the capacity to see clearly without needing immediate action. The woman practices this capacity. She waits. Waiting is no longer anxious. It is attentive. She trusts that what belongs will reveal itself in time. This trust softens her relationship with the future. The future no longer feels like a solution. It feels like a continuation. She is not living toward fulfillment. She is living from coherence. Coherence makes the present sufficient. Not perfect. Sufficient. This sufficiency is deeply stabilizing. Loneliness once felt like a verdict on her worth. Now it feels like a passing weather system. It comes. It goes. It does not define the climate. The climate is steadiness. Steadiness allows nuance. She can feel longing without urgency. She can feel desire without grasping. She can feel sadness without collapse. These capacities create inner dignity. Dignity is often mistaken for distance, but dignity is simply self-respect embodied. The woman respects her inner life now. She does not expose it indiscriminately. She does not hide it either. She shares it where it can land. Landing matters. Words spoken without landing create emptiness. Words received create connection. She waits for landing. This waiting filters relationships naturally. She notices that some people begin to show up differently around her. They sense her groundedness. They slow down. They listen more carefully. Not all, but some. These moments are quiet confirmations, not validations. Confirmations. They tell her she is aligned. Alignment is felt before it is proven. Jung emphasized that the psyche recognizes truth somatically. The body knows. The woman listens to her body now. She trusts the subtle yes. She honors the subtle no. This somatic listening prevents overextension. Overextension once created burnout. Burnout once intensified loneliness. The cycle has been interrupted at its root. She also begins to notice how her relationship to giving has changed. She still gives, but she no longer empties. Giving now comes from overflow, not from fear of losing connection. Overflow feels different. It is light. It does not expect return. It does not resent absence. It is free. Free giving invites free receiving. Not guaranteed, but possible. The woman's emotional intelligence has matured into emotional sovereignty. Sovereignty means self-governance. She governs her attention, her availability, her depth. She does not outsource these to circumstance. This sovereignty creates an inner companion. She is no longer accompanied by self-doubt. She is accompanied by discernment. Discernment is calm. It does not shout. It does not argue. It simply knows. Knowing reduces loneliness at its core, because loneliness thrives in confusion. Confusion about self, about worth, about belonging. Belonging is no longer external. It is internalized. She belongs to herself. From this belonging, external belonging may arise, but it is no longer required. For stability, Jung believed that when the self is realized, the fear of isolation diminishes, not because isolation disappears, but because it loses its threat. The woman experiences this. She can be alone, without being abandoned. She can be quiet, without being erased. She can be unseen, without becoming unreal. These capacities mark the end of existential loneliness. What remains is choice. Choice to engage. Choice to retreat. Choice to wait. Choice grounded in self-knowledge. Self-knowledge lived, not analyzed. And in this lived knowing, the woman continues forward, not searching, not escaping, but participating, fully, quietly, consciously. And the journey, though no longer lonely, remains deeply her own. As conscious participation becomes her default state, the woman realizes something essential. She is no longer waiting for permission. Not permission to speak. Not permission to withdraw. Not permission to be complex. Permission was once external. Now it is internal. Jung believed that neurosis often comes from living according to borrowed permissions. Rules absorbed unconsciously. Expectations inherited silently. The woman has returned those permissions to where they belong. She authorizes herself. This authorization is quiet, but it restructures everything. She notices how often she once adjusted her tone to be palatable, how often she softened truths to maintain ease. Now, she values clarity over comfort, not harshness. Clarity. Clarity does not wound unnecessarily. It simply does not hide. The woman speaks less, but when she does, she speaks cleanly. No excess explanation. No emotional padding. This precision is not cold. It is respectful. It respects herself and the listener. Jung emphasized that precision of expression reflects inner integration. When the psyche is fragmented, speech becomes defensive. When the psyche is coherent, speech becomes exact. The woman feels this shift. She no longer feels misunderstood as often, not because everyone understands her, but because she no longer overinvests in being understood. Understanding becomes mutual or irrelevant. This reduces inner tension. She is no longer negotiating her reality. She inhabits it. Inhabitation creates gravity. Others feel it. Some lean closer. Some step back. Both responses are appropriate. The woman does not interpret distance as loss. She sees it as differentiation. Differentiation is no longer painful. It is expected. Jung taught that individuation inevitably separates, not permanently, but selectively. The woman accepts this. She stops equating separation with failure. Separation simply means two paths diverge. This acceptance releases pressure. Pressure once drove loneliness. Without pressure, loneliness has nowhere to anchor. She also begins to notice how time feels different now. Less rushed, less anticipatory. She is not living ahead of herself. She is present. Presence changes time perception. Moments feel fuller, not longer. Fuller. This fullness creates satisfaction, independent of circumstance. She can have a quiet day and feel complete. She can have minimal interaction and feel nourished. This was impossible before. Before, interaction compensated for inner absence. Now, interaction is optional. Optionality is freedom. Jung believed that freedom emerges when necessity dissolves. The woman no longer needs to be needed. This does not make her less caring. It makes her care voluntary. Voluntary care is sustainable. Sustainable care does not breed resentment. Resentment once poisoned her relationships. Now, it rarely appears. When it does, it is brief. It signals misalignment and passes. She listens. Listening prevents accumulation. Accumulation once led to emotional overload. Overload once led to withdrawal. The pattern is broken. The woman's solitude now has texture. It is not empty. It is layered. Thought, feeling, memory, imagination. These layers interact gently. She enjoys her inner world. Enjoyment is a sign of reconciliation. She has reconciled with her own depth. Depth is no longer a burden. It is home. Jung believed that when the psyche finds its home, symptoms dissolve. Loneliness was a symptom, not of lack of people, but of lack of home. Home is internal now. She carries it. This internal home changes how she approaches uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer feels like threat. It feels like openness. She does not rush to define the future. She allows it to unfold. Unfolding feels natural when one is not desperate for resolution. Desperation once narrowed her vision. Now vision is wide. She sees possibilities without clinging to them. This non-clinging is maturity. The emotionally intelligent woman has become emotionally free. Free not from feeling, but from compulsion. She feels fully. She acts deliberately. She rests without guilt. Guilt once accompanied rest. Rest now feels deserved. Deservedness no longer needs proof. She does not earn rest. She inhabits it. This self-trust radiates quietly. Others may sense safety around her, not because she absorbs emotions, but because she is stable. Stability is comforting, but she does not become a refuge at her own expense. She allows mutuality. Mutuality was once rare. Now it is required. Without it, she disengages kindly. Kind disengagement is a sign of integration. No drama, no collapse, no bitterness, just truth. Truth lived gently. Jung believed that truth, when lived rather than argued, heals both the individual and the field around them. The woman does not try to heal others. She lives aligned. This alignment influences silently. It invites others into their own coherence. Some accept, some resist. She allows both. Allowance creates peace. Peace is no longer something she waits for. It is something she carries. And with this peace, the woman continues forward, not searching for belonging, not defending her depth, simply living. And in this living, loneliness has completed its task. It taught her how to come home. Now that she has arrived, she walks on, accompanied by herself. As being accompanied by herself becomes the norm, the woman begins to experience a different kind of openness. Not openness toward everyone, but openness toward life itself. She no longer filters experience through the question of how it will be received. She allows moments to be moments. This shifts her relationship with meaning. Meaning is no longer something she extracts from connection. It arises naturally from participation. Jung believed that meaning emerges when the psyche is aligned with its own rhythm. The woman is no longer forcing rhythm. She follows it. There are days of inwardness, days of expression, days of quiet joy, days of unanswered questions. None of these feel wrong. Wrongness once intensified loneliness. Now, variance feels natural. She no longer pathologizes her moods. She reads them. Each state carries information. Energy says move. Fatigue says pause. Longing says attend. Contentment says remain. She listens without judgment. Judgment once fractured her inner life. Listening integrates it. This integration changes how she relates to absence. Absence is no longer immediately filled. She allows gaps. Gaps invite reflection. Reflection deepens understanding. The woman realizes that much of her past loneliness came from rushing to fill space before understanding what it was asking for. Now she waits. Waiting is not passive. It is receptive. Receptivity is feminine wisdom embodied. Jung associated receptivity with psychological fertility, not productivity. Fertility. Something new forms in spaces that are not overmanaged. The woman allows herself to not know. Not knowing once terrified her. Now, it feels spacious. Not knowing frees her from premature conclusions. She does not label experiences too quickly. She lets them breathe. This breathing creates trust. Trust in process. Process over outcome. The emotionally intelligent woman has stopped negotiating her existence. She is not proving her depth. She is living it. She is not performing wholeness. She is inhabiting it. This inhabitation changes how others approach her. Some sense safety. Some sense boundary. Some sense distance. All sense clarity. Clarity reduces confusion. Confusion once led to misalignment. Misalignment once bred loneliness. The chain is broken. She notices now that even when she is misunderstood, she does not feel erased. Her sense of reality is internal. This internal grounding is perhaps the most radical shift. Jung believed that neurosis arises when the ego depends too heavily on external confirmation. The woman has reclaimed her center. She does not require constant mirroring to know who she is. This does not make her isolated. It makes her stable. Stability allows genuine curiosity. She can ask questions without needing approval. She can explore ideas without defending identity. She can be wrong without collapsing. This flexibility is psychological freedom. Freedom does not remove loneliness entirely, but it changes its quality. Loneliness, when it appears now, is gentle. It does not accuse. It simply invites inward return. She responds kindly. She has learned that every inner state wants relationship, not rejection. She relates to herself as she once related to others, with patience, with curiosity, with respect. This reversal is profound. The care she once externalized has come home. Home is no longer a place. It is a way of being. Jung believed that when the psyche feels at home, life becomes symbolic rather than literal. Events are not just events. They are conversations. The woman listens to these conversations. She notices patterns without obsessing. She senses direction without forcing clarity. Direction emerges naturally when resistance dissolves. She is no longer resisting herself. This non-resistance creates ease. Ease does not mean lack of challenge. It means lack of inner friction. Challenges are met cleanly, without self-blame, without dramatization. Clean response conserves energy. Energy returns to presence. Presence deepens. And as presence deepens, something subtle but unmistakable occurs. The woman no longer experiences herself as waiting to be met. She experiences herself as already here, already whole, already enough. From this ground, connection becomes an encounter between two complete worlds, not a solution, not a remedy, an encounter. And encounters, when they happen, are no longer burdened with the weight of loneliness. They are shared moments, freely entered, freely left. The woman trusts this freedom. She trusts herself within it. And with this trust, she continues, not toward an ending, but within a life that finally feels inhabited. And this is where the movement completes, not with a final answer, but with a truth that has been lived. The woman is no longer waiting to be found. She is no longer hoping someone else will name her depth. She no longer measures her worth by the intensity of her attachments, because she has realized something essential. She was never alone. She was in process. Loneliness was the threshold. Awareness was the passage. Presence became the destination. Jung understood that true individuation always ends in a different relationship with life. No more striving to belong. No more self-abandonment. No more negotiating inner truth for external approval. The woman now walks accompanied by her own coherence. And from this place, connection is no longer a need. It is a choice. If this journey resonated with you, if these words gave language to something you have been carrying quietly, then this space is meant for you. Subscribe to continue exploring Carl Jung's depth psychology, the feminine inner journey, and the subtle transformations that turn loneliness into presence, awareness, and inner authority. This is not an ending. It is the point from which everything begins to make sense. See you in the next inner journey.